Okay, it's another day on the farm, and as always I have plenty to do. But today I am, there are going to be things that I'm doing outside, but what I'm going to be doing first though is right down here. So I picked up a new welder yesterday, and so what I did was I just brought the welders out that I use around here, and just to kind of show you the difference between them and why I picked up this other welder. It's probably not going to be too difficult to figure out which one is the new one. And it's the Lincoln 225 Arc Welder, AC Arc Welder that I picked up. These Lincoln welders have been around for a long time. As a matter of fact, that looks almost identical to the welder that I learned on back when I was in the 9th grade of high school. And I haven't had a stick welder since I learned to weld back in high school, and then other types of school that I went through where welding was required and that type of thing. But so I've been meaning to pick up a stick welder because they just have a wide variety of uses for them. And so I went ahead and picked one up yesterday. I was in Lowe's. I needed to pick up something else, and I knew that I had a welding job that I needed to do this weekend. And that is that I have a couple of cracks that are on the bucket of my skid steer. And that material is kind of thick on there. And so I'm gonna not only need to fill the cracks, but I'm also gonna put some plates over the top of it to kind of reinforce where those cracks occurred. And I got to thinking about the welders that I have and if they would do the job. So we'll get back to this new one that I just bought right here. Once again, it's a Lincoln AC 225 Arc Welder, or what a lot of people refer to as a stick welder. But let's talk about some of the other welders that I have. This is another welder that I have used for a long time. And it is a wire feed welder, or a MIG welder, if you will. And this one is 220 volt. This particular welder is set up for gas. This has a carbon dioxide tank associated with it. And that tank is empty, so I knew that I wasn't going to be able to use this particular welder. But this would be an excellent welder if you had a shop setup where you're pretty much going to be using it indoors all the time. It's not to say that it can't be used outdoors, but for the most part, this type of setup is going to be an indoor shop type setup where you're going to be able to replace the gas as you go through it, and have 220 power outlet in order to be able to run it. Now, this welder right here, I could very well set up as a flux core if I wanted to. Right up underneath here is the roll of wire, and I could take that off, and I could go by and pick up an equivalent size roll that has a flux core. A flux core wire means that I don't have to use the gas anymore, so I could disconnect the gas, put the flux core wire in it, and I could use it with a 220 volt outlet, and this welder would work just fine. The reason I don't normally use this welder anymore is because it's kind of big and cumbersome. And so to try to drag this thing around, especially on a farm where a lot of your things are going to be out somewhere else, where it's going to be easier to bring the welder to the equipment rather than the equipment to the welder. That one I just kind of got away from using, especially after I bought this one. I was at Tractor Supply one day, and I picked up this one. This is a farmhand. It's 115 volt, which means I can plug it into just your regular household outlet. It's a MIG welder as well, a wire feed MIG welder, but this one is a flux core, which means I don't have to have the gas that's associated with it. I can put gas on this if I want to. It came with this setup with the regulator, and it came with the hose and the clamps and everything that I would need if I wanted to use gas with it. But I don't want to use gas with it because that's why I bought it. I don't want to have to be burdened with making sure that my gas tanks are filled, or I'm not going to run out while I'm using it. And having access to 110 is more prevalent than having access to 220 for my needs anyway. And I think that's probably true for a lot of people who are going to be using welders or have a need for a welder. All around, that is a very good welder. It's called a farmhand, and Tractor Supply handles it, but it's actually a Campbell Hausfeld, and they're pretty lightweight. I mean, I can pick that thing up off of that cart, and I can put it in the back of a truck or my side-by-side. I can take it somewhere, and as long as I have a 110 outlet, I can run that. And like I say, it's already got the flex core, and so I don't have to worry about the gas. So that has, but being that it's a 115, you're kind of limited in what type of material you're going to be able to use that with. I'm actually surprised that it welds some pretty good sized material. It's not going to weld the same type of thicker material like this one is going to, like the 220 MIG welder that has the gas associated with it. But this does a pretty good job as far as overall farm repairs. I have welded bush hogs. I have made some things. I was doing a little bit of motorcycle manufacturing years back and was building up frames and things like that. And that did a really nice job. But then I decided that another addition that I'd like to make to my welders here is to have an arc welder or stick welder. This one's 220 volts, so I am going to be limited to having access to 220. But in terms of overall use that you can do with a stick welder, it doesn't use gas. So I don't have to worry about bringing this outside and welding something outside, especially in windy conditions, which is something you have to concern yourself with whenever you're using a gas shield on a wire feed welder, is if it's very windy outside, that gas is being blown away from the weld site and it disrupts your weld. Whereas an arc welder or a stick welder, you don't have to worry about that. It doesn't care. The flux is already around the rod and it's making contact with the material, and you don't have to worry about outside conditions. 220, that's kind of the drawback. You're going to have to make sure that you have access to 220. So it would kind of limit you a little bit to a shop environment or around a shop environment. Like in my case, I usually bring things here in around my basement area where I have 220 outlet inside, and as long as I can pull it up here close, then I can weld stuff. But so the three welders, you know, obviously this one is a gas shield. This one is a flux core, but it's only 115 volt, so you're going to be limited in the thickness of your material, although I am surprised at the thickness that I am able to weld with it. And then your stick welder, 220 volt, you're going to be able to get to some of your thicker materials for sure. You don't have to worry about gas shield on it. I don't have to worry about wire on it as far as wire feed. The only thing I have to concern myself with is to make sure that I have the electrodes that you need. The electrodes that I chose to use are going to be a 7018 1/8 inch, and when you buy these electrodes, or these sticks, you have to make sure that they coincide with the type of machine that you're going to be using it with. This is an AC machine, so the electrode also needs to be AC as well. So you can see right here that this is a Lincoln brand 7018 AC. All right, they do make these in DC. A DC is not going to run. Well, you know what? I'm going to take that back, because some of you guys that are professional welders out there, would a DC rod run on an AC? Or would it just run very inefficiently because of the alternating current? So that's a question I'll kind of throw out there to you. But I know that if you have an AC machine, that it's better if you go with an AC rod. All right, so those are the 3 welders that I have. The Lincoln AC 225 arc welder is the one that I just picked up. You can see that I don't even have the electrode holder put on it yet. I just pulled this thing out of the box. I don't have the grounding clamp put on it yet, or what they call the work clamp. I don't have it put on there yet. So I'm going to pull this stuff back into the basement, and I'm going to show how to hook that stuff up and just do the initial setup on the welder. Okay, so I got everything back inside the shop here now, and so what I want to do is go through the initial setup for this welder, and that is when it comes out of the box. The electrode holder, or referred to as a stinger. I've always called it a stinger. I guess when I was learning to weld, that's what we called them. So the stinger and the work clamp, or the grounding clamp, none of these things are attached to it. They obviously come in the box, and here's the stinger, and here's the work clamp, or the grounding clamp. And another thing that I want to point out about this welder is that it requires a 50 amp circuit breaker. So if you're going to be plugging this into a 220 outlet, my 220 outlet is right over here against the wall. And when I set up my shop, this is actually a sub panel that I have set up on the opposite side of where my main circuit breaker box is located. So inside of my circuit breaker box here, I have a sub panel circuit which goes, and here it is right here, which goes all the way over to the other side of the shop, and that allows me to run some of my other accessories over here that are shop related. Chargers, I have my TV, and another set, a bank of outlets, so I can plug various things in just for things that I do in my shop. But I also set this up with a 50 amp circuit breaker that goes to my 220 outlet. So that's something that you want to keep in mind, is that this particular welder does require a 50 amp capacity. You could probably run it on something less, but you could expect that that circuit breaker would probably pop depending on the length of the beads and how much work that you're trying to do. So just keep that in mind. In the instructions, it does tell you that 50 amps is required. And so if your shop isn't set up that way already, you might want to take that into consideration when buying one of these welders. All right, so anyway, what we want to do is set this thing up. So let's just put our electro cable over here on the bench, and let's set everything up. All right, so I'm going to want to put this cable into this clamp, and I did in fact read the directions ahead of time. Most of the time I just try to figure this stuff out on my own, but anyway, there's a screw right here. Just undo this screw, you're going to be able to take the handle loose from the electrode, or the electrode holder. And then right in here is where your end is going to go for your wire. So I'm going to take this loose, put it in there, and then we'll tighten that down. What we want to do first is we want to slide that handle over the top of the cable. Set that off to the side, set my original screw off to the side. I'm going to loosen this one up. Okay, by doing that, you can see my little holder that was sitting here on the inside came out with it. I'll put my screw back in. Put my cable over the top of it. I'll put my holder. Back down over the screw. Alright, so I'm screwing my holder back down. See what I'm doing there is the holder is screwing back down over the top of the cable. Okay, so you can see I got the cable. I'm going to straighten that cable just a little bit. Let's make that nice and straight. Alright, now we got it straight. Slide my handle back up. Line up the hole. A screw in there. Alright, nice and secure. I got my cable on there. My stinger is ready to go. Alright, next thing we'll do is bring the cable up for your work clamp. And by the way, if I didn't mention this, how do I know when I'm looking at the front of this machine, the two cables that are coming out of it, how do I know which one goes to the stinger and which one is going to go to the work clamp? A general rule of thumb is that the stinger is always going to be the longer cable. And in this case, that's the upper cable. If I were to lay the two of these out on the floor, the stinger cable is longer. And the work cable, or the grounding clamp, is always going to be shorter. But also, the directions told me that. So, that's how I know. See, it doesn't always hurt to look at the directions. Okay, so there is my work clamp. And I can see right here that this is where my clamp is going to go. I have two nuts that are on this stud right here. One is a locking nut. So that one's going to take this whole clamp mechanism and it's going to secure it into place. I'm going to make sure that that's tight. Also, what we're going to do is, you can see that this has kind of a hole in here where I'm going to feed my cable up through here. So I'm going to take this work clamp cable, I'm going to put it through that hole. I am going to put it over that stud, and I am going to put the other nut over the top of it, essentially locking it into place. I'm going to secure it. Back it off just a little bit so it doesn't bind. It's still tight, but it's not binding. Alright, so there you go. Seems like there would be a sleeve. No. Seems like there would be a sleeve or something that would hold that, kind of hold that in place. There's not. So what I'm going to do Good old-fashioned duct tape. I'm going to hold that in place with some duct tape. I just know how I operate. And that's going to be something, that cable, I'll catch it on something one day. Or I'll accidentally put a weld through it. Something. Alright, that's better. That kind of holds that in place a little bit. I think if I were doing this, I would have a couple little sleeves that I would put on there. Because depending on how close that grounding cable is to your work, that handle can get hot. So anyway, let's just put another thing on there. Alright, so there we go. We got the grounding cable put on there, or the work cable, and we got the electrode put on. Alright, so there we go. There's the two cables. The work cable and the electrode. Alright, so believe it or not, other than turning it on and putting a rod on there, that's all you have to do with this. That's your setup. So the next job that I have is that I've got to bring that skid steer around, and I've got to look at the holes that I have in that bucket and look at making a repair on that. And I am going to do that with this new Lincoln AC 225 arc welder that I just got. I'm looking forward to this. I haven't done any stick welding in a number of years. That's what I learned on, and I'm glad I picked up that welder. By the way, these things are pretty cheap. You know, to get an arc welder, a 220 volt arc welder that has the reputation and the longevity that these welders have had, and you can pick them up for about 300 bucks. That's what I got it for at Lowe's. Alright, so we'll put this thing to the test. You know, I got stuff I got to do today. I bought a new welder, and I need to repair a bucket on the skid steer. It's got a crack on it. But you know something, I had to pull the bike out of the basement here just a minute ago so that I can make room to get the skid steer inside that area. And when I pulled that bike out, I thought, you know something, it's a nice day. I'm blowing everything off and I'm going for a ride. Let's go, man. Oh yeah, baby. Come on, you don't blame me, do you? well, it was only supposed to be just a short little ride. It ended up being about 2 hours. Damn it. I did it again. Alright, anyway. Got the bike out to go for a ride. That's sweet. I like it. So anyway, I blew off a lot of work today just so I could go out for a ride. It was worth it, man. Every bit of it was worth it.